We often work within a metaphorical framework when speaking and thinking of politics that resembles a pendulum. Sometimes, perhaps even frequently, this pendulum is appropriately represented in real-world politics, such as the pendulum swings we can witness in the workings of government, when either the Democrats or the Republicans gain a majority representation in the House of Representatives or the Senate. And this, of course, has some effect on the flow of politics and how things proceed in terms of legislation, and by extension, we tend to look at the entire political sphere as one which exists within the metaphor of the pendulum. But is this view one that maps onto reality, or is this something that we merely tell ourselves? Perhaps more precisely, a paradigm that was always limited to a certain time and place, paradigmatic for an epoch, but not for any time span beyond a few decades. I ask this openly because everyone with ears and eyes has borne witness to the massive changes in our political interactions that characterize our age. Something this time around has changed fundamentally. Compromise, once referred to as the art of politics, has become an endangered species, and mutual understanding, even as simply for the sake of pragmatic coexistence, is foundered. No, I'm not saying that the end is nigh or making apocalyptic predictions concerning the future, but something has indeed gone awry, and it all took place in the blink of an eye. The internet became open to the world in the year 1991. And it did take a while for it to become popular, but fast forward to the current year, and could anyone envision life without it? Nearly 30 years on, it is difficult to imagine what life would be like without it, because of the impact it has had on every aspect of human life, and most interestingly, how human interaction itself has changed. In some sense, the internet has short-circuited how we interact and how we get to know each other. There's no eye contact, no reading of facial expressions, nothing of the sort we evolved within and into. More often than not, just a voice that can come and go with the wind on a whim, picking and choosing which site, which channel, or which room to inhabit, only to leave within an hour, a minute, or a second. The nature of this type of interaction served to further a social disconnectedness that had been ongoing for some time prior to the emergence of the internet, and accelerated it. We all know and recognize this wary interaction, this speaking with internet specters, where we only hear words and little else. It was into this abyss of new social disconnectedness and dysfunction that a new political order entered. Taking many by surprise, people who had been used to the pendulum swing of politics and the constant back and forth, something that might have rightly had its place in reality, but we have moved beyond that. And those who had been stuck in the old reality got left behind, left in a state of bafflement and bemusement, akin to being hit by a Mack truck in the sense of having never seen the things coming in the first place. It's a broad tendency of the left, and more specifically the progressive left, to desire change. The right, by way of contrast, and conservatives specifically, are typically not so desirous of change. It's a function of personality type as much as anything else. And this time there was a single critical factor involved that made the insatiable desire for change on the part of the left an unstoppable juggernaut, the internet. Whereas once there might have been the swing of some metaphorical pendulum, the internet simply does not avail itself of such a thing in the same way as do branches of government. The checking and balancing of power does not exist in the relative free-for-all and wild west of the internet. And it's important to note that the general trend of creators, scientists and tech innovators, is to be first and foremost interested in their respective enterprise, inventing, discovering, and innovating. Very few of the brightest minds actually think, ironically enough, long-term about the social and political implications of what they do and that they bring with their work. And there's nothing wrong with that fundamentally. After all, it only makes sense that such people be interested in the technicalities of their craft. But any invention of any significance can and will be used for purposes beyond the obvious, beyond the basic purpose for which it had been created. For example, it's highly unlikely that the Wright brothers were thinking about the possibility of atomic weapons being deployed by B-29s over Japan during World War II. And could John Rock and Gregory Pincus have known about the implications of the birth control pill, socially, politically, or otherwise? Maybe, maybe not. No one is a clairvoyant, not even the smartest of men. Technologies tend to take on a life of their own in time, and where they end up will always be unpredictable. When the internet first came online, very few envisioned it to become as important as it is now, and in some circles and to some people, larger than life itself, or more important than what has come to be referred to as IRL, or in real life? Well, someone did recognize that the internet was important beyond the technology itself, and someone began thinking about all the things that could be done with this technology. And it wasn't the creators, the inventors, and the tech heads. It was political opportunists, most of whom could be called progressive. As I pointed out earlier, one of the primary characteristics of the left is its perpetual dissatisfaction with the status quo, with how things are. In brief, things are never good enough. They're just never okay, and therefore things, and specifically the things they deem to be important, must be changed. It only makes sense because if there's a new frontier, why wouldn't you seize hold of it to push your agenda? To make the changes you want to make, especially when you're so obsessed in making those changes to begin with, and continually and eternally dissatisfied with the status quo. By the time the right even became aware of the internet's power, it was already GG, because as ever, the right is only reactive. Because the accusation might be made, the right is too content with the status quo and how things are, absolutely puzzled and astounded that the opposition could be so riled up about what they perceive to be no big deal at all. Sure, there are a few left-right wedge issues, abortion for example, that some right-leaning people get upset about, but generally speaking, the right is slower to react and even slower to act. The right, one could say, was defeated by its very own nature. Perhaps it was providence, but left-leaning political ideologues did manage to gain not just a foothold of the most important influential media outlets, Twitter, Google, Reddit, among others, but virtual total control. To be sure, there are some right-leaning outlets, but there are far and few between, and none has the scope and reach of, say, a Google or a Reddit. And this is why the outdated paradigms we've used in the past, the pendulum, the balancing of political power, and yes, even the notion of compromise has gone out the window. People seek out compromise when they want to achieve something and they cannot win wholesale on their own, and are reduced to bargaining because the opposition has some share of power as well. But on the larger-than-life internet, anything of any importance is run and effectively regulated by the left already, and therefore no compromise, no attempt to understand the other side is necessary. People have asked why it is the right seemingly has an understanding of the left's interests, the things they regard as important, and their motivations. But by way of contrast, the utter lack of even the attempt to do so regarding the right from the left. But if you have everything you want and the compromises you would traditionally make would be with people you utterly despise, as the left tends to do so with the right, or really anything they perceive as right, why would you even bother? Again, compromise only occurs when there's some relative power balance that precipitates the compromise in the first place. And politics will always be downwind from culture. And to the extent there was ever a culture war, it has been won. And frankly, it's debatable as to whether or not there was ever a war to begin with. By my reckoning, it was far more of a slaughter, with a lone soldier here and there getting trampled even as he rose to protest. But this development was not universal by any means in the world. In the East, things have been going another way, and a different form of internet takeover has taken place, arguably one far worse for anyone who wishes to speak his mind. And the effete powers that took over the internet of the West are likely to crumble in the face of this power. Perhaps the entire order of things as we know it will crumble in the face of the People's Republic. And perhaps once they begin to pick up momentum, it will be GG for the West. Left, right, it doesn't matter in light of the authoritarian solidarity that the PRC represents as much as it was for compromise, balance, and reasonable discussion in the West when the tech ideologues set things in motion, hardly causing a stir until it was too late. Just a matter of time, I suppose. No, this time around something else is on the horizon, but we in the West are just too stubborn to pay attention. At least most of us. Most of us are still too busy squabbling over whatever petty issue of the day presents itself. It might still be possible to wake up from our delirium. There might still be a few years left, but the clock is ticking, and it does not tick in our favor. In fact, we might just be a hair's breadth away from GG. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.